When most people think about medieval war, they imagine moments, a battle, a charge, a clash of steel. Something that begins and ends quickly, something dramatic enough to be remembered. But the hidden reality of medieval war was not built around moments. It was built around time, long stretches of it, slow days, quiet nights, and endless waiting. For most medieval soldiers, war was not something that happened suddenly. It arrived slowly, settled into their lives, and refused to leave. Hunger came before combat. Fatigue came before fear. Obedience came before choice. While kings and generals spoke in public about honor, duty, or faith, the men who carried weapons lived inside a different truth, one shaped by survival rather than belief. This story is not about famous battles or heroic leaders. It is about what medieval war actually felt like for the people who made it possible. The men who marched, waited, obeyed, and endured. To understand medieval warfare, we must step away from legend and look directly at its hidden reality. In the hidden reality of medieval war, the soldier was not an individual with a voice or a vision of the future. He was part of a system built around power. His role was not to understand the war, but to sustain it. Kings and generals planned campaigns from a distance, surrounded by maps, messengers, and advisors. The soldier experienced those plans through cold mornings, aching legs, and empty meals. Most soldiers never knew why a campaign truly began. The reasons they heard were simple and familiar: defense of land, loyalty to a lord, protection of faith. These explanations were repeated often, spoken aloud so they would sound convincing. But beneath them were hidden motives that rarely reached the ears of ordinary men. Disputes over borders, political leverage, unpaid alliances, or personal ambition mattered far more than any speech delivered to the ranks. Power in medieval war moved in one direction. Orders traveled downward. Obedience moved upward. A soldier learned quickly that asking questions brought no answers. Authority did not explain itself. It expected compliance. In this reality of war, survival depended on learning how to listen, how to wait, and how to obey without hesitation. Daily life inside an army was shaped entirely by command. When to rise, when to eat, when to march, when to stop. None of it belonged to the individual. Generals controlled movement, food, and discipline. A soldier's body became part of the campaign, treated as a resource to be used until it failed. Hunger, exhaustion, and cold were not exceptions. They were normal conditions accepted as the cost of power. Punishment reinforced this system constantly. Discipline was public, visible, and deliberate. Whippings, confinement, loss of rations, or execution reminded everyone of the price of disobedience. Fear worked faster than loyalty. It required no belief, only awareness. In this system, soldiers obeyed not because they trusted authority, but because authority could harm them immediately. Over time, war stopped feeling temporary. Campaign life became routine. Days blended together, marked by the same commands and the same waiting. Kings and generals thought in months and years, measuring success in territory and influence. Soldiers lived hour by hour, focused on staying upright, staying fed, and staying unnoticed. They carried out decisions shaped by hidden goals they would never fully see. Before the first enemy appeared, before any blade was raised, the soldier had already lost control over his life. That loss began not on the battlefield, but in the quiet acceptance of authority that defined everything that followed. Very few medieval soldiers stepped into war freely. In the hidden reality of medieval war, service often began with pressure rather than choice. Authority reached into villages through laws, debts, and obligations that were impossible to ignore. When kings prepared for war, their power did not remain in castles. It moved outward, touching farms, workshops, and homes. Feudal duty bound many men to service. Land, protection, and permission to live under a lord's rule came at a price. That price was obedience. Refusing the call was rarely an option. Fines, loss of land, imprisonment, or violence followed those who resisted. Generals and local officials enforced these duties firmly, reminding communities that authority always arrived before mercy. Others joined because life outside the army offered little security. Poverty, hunger, and debt shaped daily existence. War promised food, pay, and a sense of structure. These promises felt reassuring to men who lived with uncertainty. Yet they hid deeper risks. Campaign life offered stability only in appearance. Once inside the army, escape became difficult. Recruitment was often rushed and disorderly. Men were gathered quickly, given little time to prepare or say goodbye. Weapons were handed out. Discipline was imposed. Individual identity faded almost immediately. A man stopped being known for his trade or family. He became part of a campaign, defined by his place in the line. Once inside the army, soldiers began to sense the imbalance of power. Supplies were uneven. Orders favored certain groups. Decisions always benefited those above. But by then, the path back was closed. Authority had already claimed them. Survival depended on endurance, not understanding. Once a campaign began, soldiers learned that medieval war was shaped by movement rather than combat. The march defined their lives. Day after day, men walked long roads under open skies, carrying heavy loads that never seemed to grow lighter. Armor pressed into shoulders, weapons pulled at tired arms, every step demanded effort. Generals planned routes strategically, but soldiers experienced them physically. Roads were uneven, muddy, dusty, or flooded. Progress was slow. Orders arrived without explanation. Stop. Wait. Move again. Time stretched in strange ways, filled with uncertainty. Authority revealed itself in its control over pace, direction, and rest. Food followed behind, when it followed at all. Supplies arrived late or failed entirely. Soldiers learned to ration, to improvise, to endure hunger quietly. Tempers shortened, discipline weakened. Still, the campaign continued, driven by hidden goals far removed from the march itself. Kings calculated outcomes. Soldiers counted steps. Waiting became as common as walking. Armies paused for weather, negotiation, or indecision. Camps were built and abandoned repeatedly. Each pause drained morale. War felt heavy and quiet. There was no glory in waiting, only routine enforced by authority. Gradually, the march reshaped the soldiers' sense of time. The future narrowed to the next command, the next meal, the next place to sleep. Campaign life reduced existence to essentials. Exhaustion became constant, and internal tension grew. As weeks passed and campaigns stretched beyond their original plans, hunger stopped being a temporary problem and became a permanent condition. In the hidden reality of medieval war, food was never simply missing once. It failed slowly, in small reductions that accumulated over time. A smaller ration one day, a delayed supply the next, then silence while men waited and hoped the carts would arrive. Kings and generals could issue orders, but they could not command the land itself. Rain ruined roads, cold killed crops. Distance stretched supply lines thin until they broke. Soldiers felt these failures directly, in empty stomachs and weakening bodies. Hunger was not dramatic. It was quiet, constant, and exhausting. It followed men from morning to night, shaping every thought and movement. As hunger deepened, discipline began to crack. Men became short-tempered, less patient, more suspicious of one another. Arguments broke out over food. Small thefts became common. A piece of bread missing from a sack could start a fight. Authority responded as it always did, with punishment. Fear was used to patch the growing cracks, even as the foundation continued to weaken. Illness spread in the same slow, invisible way. Camps were crowded, dirty, and temporary. Water sources were unreliable. Waste accumulated. A single fever could move through a group in days, not because of malice, but because there was nowhere to escape it. Soldiers grew weaker, coughed through the night, or collapsed during the march, quietly removed from the line. These losses were rarely acknowledged openly. They did not appear in speeches or official accounts. Generals spoke of readiness and control, even as the army thinned around them. The secrets of power demanded silence. Admitting weakness threatened authority, so weakness was ignored. As numbers fell, pressure increased on those who remained. Marches did not shorten. Orders did not soften. Authority demanded the same effort from fewer bodies. Soldiers felt increasingly replaceable, aware that their suffering served goals far beyond their reach. Pain stayed close. Power remained distant. Slowly, almost unnoticed, the army began to consume itself. Not through battle, but through exhaustion, hunger, and sickness. This was the true attrition of medieval war. Quiet, relentless, and far more effective than any enemy force. And as this internal collapse deepened, control had to become even harsher to hold what remained together. In the hidden reality of medieval war, Discipline was not a symbol of professionalism. It was a survival mechanism for authority. As hunger and illness weakened armies, generals relied more heavily on fear to maintain order. Control had to be visible, immediate, and unquestionable. Any sign of hesitation threatened the fragile structure holding the army together. Rules were strict, but rarely consistent. Punishment depended less on justice and more on necessity. A soldier might be punished severely for a small offense, not because it mattered, but because an example was needed. Discipline was a language spoken loudly and publicly, designed to be remembered long after the pain faded. Fear replaced trust completely. Authority no longer needed belief, loyalty, or shared purpose. It needed obedience. Soldiers learned to watch themselves constantly, their words, their movements, even their expressions. Survival depended on blending into the routine, neither standing out nor falling behind. Generals understood the danger of desperation. Hungry, exhausted men were unpredictable. Control had to be constant. Patrols moved through camps at night. Whispers were listened for. Any sign of unrest was treated as a threat to power itself. The secrets of command were simple and brutal. An army could fall apart without ever meeting the enemy. For the soldier, this created a constant, low pressure that never lifted. There was no true rest. Even stillness felt watched. Every day required restraint. Loyalty became something performed rather than felt. Obedience became a habit, reinforced by repetition and fear. Over time, many soldiers stopped thinking in terms of right or wrong. They thought in terms of consequences, what could be said, what could not, when to move, when to remain silent. War reduced moral choices into calculations of survival. And yet, even the most rigid discipline could not erase exhaustion. Fear could delay collapse, but it could not prevent it forever. Armies rarely ended in dramatic defeat. More often, they faded. In the hidden reality of medieval war, collapse was slow and quiet. Desertion happened one man at a time, usually at night, usually without witnesses. A soldier would simply not be there in the morning. For many, desertion was not rebellion, it was survival. Campaigns stretched far beyond what had been promised. Pay disappeared, food failed. Orders continued as if nothing had changed. Staying meant accepting a slow death. Leaving meant risk, but also possibility. Authority responded with severity. Captured deserters were punished publicly. Executions and mutilations served as warnings. Fear slowed the flow, but it never stopped it. Exhaustion always found cracks in control. As numbers dropped, the army changed shape. Marches slowed, units merged. Objectives quietly shifted. Official explanations spoke of strategy or negotiation, but soldiers felt the truth. The campaign was losing strength. Power was retreating without admitting it. Generals delayed acknowledgement as long as possible. Authority rarely admits failure openly. But soldiers sensed it in the silences between orders, in the longer waits, in the absence of direction. Collapse was not announced, it was felt. Eventually, withdrawal replaced ambition. Armies turned back thinner, quieter, and altered. There was no victory, no clear ending, only survival and exhaustion. The end of a campaign did not end the war for those who survived it. Home felt unfamiliar. The habits of control remained. Soldiers woke early without orders, ate quickly without hunger, watched others with caution. War had reshaped their sense of normal. Many returned with little reward. Pay was missing or incomplete. Promises were forgotten. Bodies carried lasting damage, untreated wounds, chronic pain, weakness from months of hunger and illness. Survival was the only achievement, and even that felt fragile. Communities struggled to absorb them. Fields had changed. Families had adapted. Authority that once demanded obedience now offered nothing. The secrets of power became clear in hindsight. Soldiers were essential during war, invisible after it ended. Some tried to return to ordinary life. Others could not. Campaign life had given structure to suffering. Peace felt uncertain, even dangerous. Some drifted toward new conflicts, mercenary work, or instability, not from cruelty, but from familiarity. The hidden reality of medieval war did not end on the battlefield or the road home. It lived on in weakened bodies, altered minds, and quiet memories. Reminders that power moves forward, but those who carry it often remain behind. When we step back and look at the hidden reality of medieval war as a whole, a different picture slowly takes shape. Not one defined by battles or heroes, but by endurance. War was not an event that happened to soldiers. It was a condition they lived inside, often for months or years, shaped by authority, control, and silence. The true struggle was not against an enemy army, but against hunger, exhaustion, fear, and uncertainty. Kings and generals pursued power through strategy, alliances, and hidden ambitions. Their decisions moved armies across regions and borders. Yet they rarely carried the weight of those decisions themselves. That burden fell on ordinary men, pulled into campaigns they did not design, serving goals they did not fully understand. In this system, soldiers were not partners in war. They were instruments, used until they could no longer function. Understanding this reality forces us to reconsider how medieval warfare actually worked. Armies did not survive because of bravery alone. They survived through control, discipline, and the willingness of soldiers to endure conditions that slowly broke their bodies and spirits. Most campaigns ended not in decisive victory, but in withdrawal, exhaustion, and quiet collapse. Survival, not triumph, was the most common outcome. This perspective also changes how we read historical records. Chronicles speak of victories and defeats, of treaties and commanders. They rarely speak of the men who waited in camps, walked endless roads, or returned home changed. Those experiences were considered ordinary, unworthy of record. Yet they formed the true foundation of medieval war. The hidden reality, then, is not simply that war was harsh. It is that it was structured to be endured by those with the least power, while its benefits flowed upward. Authority moved on to the next campaign, the next negotiation, the next ambition. Soldiers carried the cost forward into their lives, their bodies, and their memories. As you reflect on this story, consider which part stayed with you the most. Was it the waiting, the hunger, the fear, or the quiet way campaigns ended without resolution? History becomes more meaningful when we listen to what is usually left unsaid. If you want to continue exploring these hidden layers of the past, the realities beneath legends and symbols, consider subscribing to the channel and activating notifications. More stories are waiting, and many truths remain hidden just beneath the surface of history.